going. Okay. Yeah, this is a long one, so we might not even finish this one all day today.
Okay.
And the reason why this one's important is because I gotta post the meeting number.
What topic is it?
Economic growth. Economic growth, chapter 7 and 8. This is topic topic 7. We are topic 7. Meeting ID is.
This is pretty interesting so far.
Yeah, and I want that T-shirt. So go get the T-shirt made.
Is that extra credit?
Yeah, I would totally give extra credit for that kind of shirt. Yeah, we wouldn't want that.
So what if
kind of shirt.
everyone in this classroom got your T-shirt?
Actually, that wouldn't be impossible because only 3 of us were here to hear about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's not being recorded yet.
So that means only 3 of us get extra credit.
Yeah, that would absolutely be true. I would agree.
And it'd be perks of coming to class.
Exactly, that would be the perks of actually physically dragging your body. Hey, we're talking about extra credit for shirts, T-shirts.
No, actually, extra credit for T-shirts.
Yeah, because we were talking about the exam and.
Okay.
I was looking up I can make one.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you really?
Yeah.
How expensive are they?
It was like $20 per shirt.
Really? For like a polo, or what are we talking here?
No, just a regular.
Just a regular T-shirt. Then how come people sell T-shirts for like super cheap amounts?
I think the cost comes from customization and then overhead for making that.
Makes sense, I guess. I guess.
I guess like for like mass-produced shirts, you can get like a stencil.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything interesting going on in anyone's life? Maybe nothing. You gotta pick your classes. That's what you gotta pick now. Right? You gotta pick classes. That's what you gotta pick. Let's see.
Oh, thank you.
I'm excited. I'm planning my trip to Japan.
For when?
December.
For December. Oh yeah, this is the trip you were talking about, right? Did you buy the tickets yet?
Yes.
Who are you all going with?
My mom, my dad, my sister, his mom, his sister.
That sounds horribly complicated.
Right? Don't you feel stressed from hearing that?
Yeah, I do. I really do, actually.
I feel stressed.
I don't know why Kristen's not listening to you or I, who are apparently twins on this matter, but she's not listening, and I don't.
He's
think
like, "Aren't you
gonna...
excited?" I'm like, "Yes, I'm excited. I'm also stressed at the same time."
Oh, you said you're stressed.
Yeah.
Kristen. Wait, you said or Kristen said?
I think I'm stressed.
I'm stressed about it, and I'm not even going on the damn trip.
But like she's not even doing.
I would be stressed. I would not want to do it. You, Kristen, you could not. Even if you bought me my ticket and said all you have to do is take care of my father, I still would not do it, even for a free trip. I'm just saying. I don't have it in me. I couldn't do it. God, it really is stressful. It's really stressing me out right now. I'm not kidding. I'm really. It sounds incredible. I even misspelled October. So, who offered to do this? All these people on this trip?
Well, it was because it's for my early graduation present.
If it's a present, shouldn't it be something you want?
It is something.
I really want to go to Japan.
Yeah, but do you need to drag everyone else?
Well, everyone else wants to go to Japan.
Can they go on their own?
I accepted it because.
Are you going on this trip?
Yes.
Oh, good luck, man.
I accepted it.
No way, man. You could not pay me. I'm sure you'll have a great time. Yeah, there's no way I could do it. Okay, we're fine. Okay. Okay, so this is a rather important one because important lecture. It's going to go a little bit longer, and we won't get it all done today, but it's still important enough that I'll end up talking about it after, even after this week, so I'll probably go into next week a little bit. I just got to make sure here I'm recording everything here. There's no video. Select camera. Start video.
Well, last week was easy. It's getting hard again.
Yeah, so now it's a little harder today. Okay. Okay. So, probably want to do that later. Okay. So, the reason why this one is so important even right now, so I'm trying to combine two chapters. That's what makes it a little longer. But also, the reason why this is particularly important is because this field basically emerges about 20 years ago. And so what's cool about it is you're learning something that's basically, you know, when I learned macro, when I first started to learn macro, which would be around that time, I mean, this was the new stuff. So, and this year's Nobel Prize in economics, half the prize went to the person who basically developed this. So this is, you know, groundbreaking work done in all of our lifetimes. You would have just been born, but it's groundbreaking stuff that was done all in our lifetime. And basically the topic here is, how do economies actually grow? Now, this is important because if you think about the very first economist that we all kind of deal with, someone like Adam Smith, that was also about why are some countries rich, why are some countries poor, wealth of nations, right? So this is a turn on that. Now, if you think back to principles, in principles, we understood countries as growing because they either had some new kind of technology, meaning they had some new method of producing something, or countries grew because they had more people, more resources, right? And that's how we could shift out the production possibilities frontier. This then is different because it's called economic growth 1 and 2, but another way to understand it would be we could call it new economic growth theory. So a lot of this then, when you took principles, we focused on these two things, having more capital and a population growing. What we're going to focus on here is then also then looking at technology and how countries can encourage the development of technology that then helps an economy grow. So let's look at South Korea. South Korea is a perfect example of a country that even as recently as the 1960s was, and 1970s, was still a developing country, South Korea. And today it's a very different country, right? It's an advanced country, a developed country, largely because that country's government subsidized and supported the development of technology, right? So they obviously they're, along with Japan, among the world's leaders in producing display screens that we all use. Apparently, right? I mean, we've got the conglomerates, the family-run businesses like the Samsungs, right, that dominate the market. And they're largely, right, the development of that country. Think back, the last time they had an Olympics in Korea was 1988, before the one just this past winter. And, right, typically when a country gets the Olympics for the first time, that's kind of their entry point into becoming a respected and developed country. And then you fast forward to today, and it's even far beyond that. But that's an example of a country that then invested heavily in their own growth to then become developed. Or even look at Japan, right? So when you guys go to Japan, right, we could say even through the 1960s, right, they would do, you know, basically it was the place where you do cheap labor stuff, right? So develop, you know, what country would make high school have a fan, like a table fan that's made in Japan. I think it's like ancient, but right, now you'd have to spend like lots of money to get a fan made in Japan, right? Because what's made in Japan, yes, there's a lot of cars made in Japan, but typically we're thinking of high-end electronics, or we're thinking of artisan kinds of things, or really fancy whiskey, right? I mean, these are all the things that we think about when we think of Japan's outputs, and we certainly think of Japan as a developed country in the Asia Pacific region of the world. Not because of dumb luck in terms of population, and certainly in Japan, they actually have to counteract low population. So it's not necessarily tax policies that encourage capital accumulation. Rather, it's government policies that encourage the development of technology, right? And to get, when you look at things like, for instance, the internet was a government-subsidized research project here in the United States, but then turned into the Facebook cat videos that you all post today. So when we have a closed economy, we basically need to determine what the population growth rate is, and we need to calculate the savings rate. And the reason why we have to do that is because if the population, going all the way back to topic 2, we saw that one of the things that was occurring, right, was that countries need to care a lot about how much capital they have per worker, right? That was one of the key determinants of economic growth, was how much capital per worker. That capital reduces over time, right, due to depreciation, but also the population changes over time, which means you then need to kind of build up your capital to replace two forces that are trying to bring down the capital per worker. I need to save money. I need to save money to build capital to replace depreciation. And I need to save money if my country is getting smaller in size. We need to calculate basically a golden rule. We need to basically calculate what the optimal saving rate and capital stock should be given a country's saving rate and population growth rate. So these are things we're going to have to calculate. Yep.
When you're saying capital, are you referring to stuff that makes other stuff?
Exactly. Yep. Okay. Yep. So we're talking only about like buildings, machines, not technology though. So the technology again is going to be the way that I combine the workers with the capital.
Which is the same technology we're talking about in the beginning.
Yep. And so technology can be new processes, new methods, new. It's almost kind of like a black box. We don't exactly. It might be hard to define exactly what it is, but when capital and people go through that process, it becomes better.
Upgraded processes.
Yeah, methods. So an example of that would be something like, for those of you who have taken any business courses, things like just-in-time inventory, or even when you do things like SWOT analysis and other things like that, all those kinds of things. I mean, you could even go even further, right? Double entry accounting is in some sense a technology, right? I mean, a way that we try to control cost. So it doesn't have to be a computer. That's not what we mean with technology. It could be a process. It could be, yes, this meeting owl thing is also a technology, but even things like how we use STAR to schedule classes now would be a technology, right? Because it means that classes become fuller and people don't take stupid classes anymore, unfortunately for me. Okay. This, you don't have to write this down. This is not important to remember, but this is why I care about growth. I mean, we're not just trying to grow for growth's sake. It's that a lot of people in the world live in the shittiest, poorest countries. And people die. Outside of the United States, which I mean, I know why, but in the Western Hemisphere, we have the, I think the second highest infant mortality rate. which is pretty bad because we're obviously the richest country in the world. Not only that, but we're the richest country in the Western Hemisphere, and we have the second highest infant mortality rate. We shouldn't. Most of the time, richer countries have lower infant mortality rates, as you kind of see here. That's probably a critique on access to prenatal care. Anyone want to guess who has the worst infant mortality rate in the Western Hemisphere?
Mexico?
Nope.
Oh.
It starts with the H. They've had unfortunate geographic.
Haiti?
Yes, Haiti. You know, Haiti. I mean, but remember this: Haiti had hurricanes and earthquakes. And it's a little country that's had decades and decades of poverty and corruption. What do you say about the United States? But the other side of this would be how the average person lives in a country. We still have poor people in the United States, just as we've always had. But even the poorest people today live far better than the poorest people even 40 years ago. As an example of that, and I show you this only because, I mean, it's not in my lifetime. If I was a little older, it'd be in my lifetime. But if we look at, let's share this. Wait, Kristen, when do you graduate?
In like a year.
You're already doing your trip. What's going to happen when, like?
Well, because the flights are super cheap.
It'll always be cheap, right? Or no?
It's $1,000 cheaper per person.
Okay. Eva, are you going to take a trip when you graduate?
I don't know.
Maybe you should go to Japan too, but invite no one but me and Leroy. What a fun trip. A guy's trip? 3 of us? You'll have all these snacks.
You walk around talking about fig bars.
Oh, man.
Work sucks.
Yeah. I'll complain about work too. Yeah. I don't know. Oh, it's going to be a fun trip. It'll be like the Hangover movies.
You'll be walking around like,
yeah, it'll be fun.
How the fuck did I get here?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it'll be fantastic.
You can't Levi in my class. He's such your ass.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So right. So I mean, I don't have to look very far here. This is only from the 1960s. Like, you know, this is some pretty bad shit. I mean, yeah. So I mean, you know, this is on the mainland. Probably the poorest part on the mainland is Appalachia. And this is from the late 1960s, early 1970s. This isn't that old.
How's Appalachia now?
It's better than this. It's still pretty bad, but it's better than that. You know, you have no running water. You have no access to, you know, basically to education. You don't have any access to any of these things. And finally, in 1965, 1966, we basically then say, okay, we're just going to throw a shit ton of money at it and just try to fix the problem. So that's where you get programs like Head Start, where you get VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America, where you're basically saying, okay, we're going to allow kids to go to school as early as like 4 years old, 3 years old, to make sure they get the education they need. We're going to move people in to start providing services, the VISTA. Currently now, you see VISTA when you see like accountants helping people with like tax returns, you see VISTA. But otherwise, VISTA would just be, I'm a professional at doing something. How can we make me do something to help others? Appalachia is better than this today. It's not much better, but it is better than this. And it's basically what I'm saying here is that it is true that in this case, if the waters are rising, everyone is helped by a stronger economy. And that's certainly true here. So we need to talk about growth theory. Why are then essentially poor countries poor? This gives us a better understanding of that. it helps us then think about the policies that countries can use to actually grow. And then we can also then talk about how do government policies actually change these things. This is all growth theory. And the cool part about growth theory is that these are exactly the things that are being put into place today. These are the things that India is actively employing right now. This is the new growth theory, this theory. China actively using new growth theory today. What is the, I think I talked about that in this class. What is the richest country in Africa, outside of South Africa, which is by far the richest? But what country other than South Africa? Well, let's just say, which one, actually I can say this. Which country in the African continent had the highest growth rate last year?
Last year?
Yep, last year, highest growth rate. Just take your guess.
Saudi Arabia.
No. Just take a guess. Any guess of a country. I'll take one more guess. Someone guess a country. That a really bad famine in the 1980s, really bad. And so that older generations like myself typically associate this with a really poor country. As a really poor country. Ethiopia, which also, the only other historical fact would be, I think Mussolini or Hitler, one of those bad guys, when they wanted to show they were strong, they like bombed the fuck out of the Ethiopians with like warplanes, but the Ethiopians didn't have any planes, so like they made themselves look really strong. But it'd be like, you know, us beating up some like 3-year-olds and saying who's tougher, right? So I mean that was kind of the equivalent. No, Ethiopia. But the reason why Ethiopia is doing so well on the African subcontinent is because it is the only country in Africa that actually does abstinence training in schools. That would be important because in a country that is, you know, quite male dominated and quite right, you know, when males dominate, they don't really worry too much about unplanned pregnancies. They don't really worry too much, right? Because they don't pay the cost, right? So in that case, right, unplanned children means that population grows faster than anticipated, which would be bad here, right? And so then the realization was, it was about a decade and a half ago, among Ethiopians was, you know, we got to really control the population growth rate. We need to normalize abstinence education in the schools so that women feel empowered to say no, but that also if the guy pushes them into it, that, right, she's still, right, there's some protection involved and you don't get an unwanted child. Or alternatively, right, that you have access to, you know, clinics and whatnot to control the population. China's obviously an incredibly good example that in 1979, you get the one-child rule. And they do that up until recently because up until recently, they didn't, you know, they finally relaxed it because they don't need to control the population as much. But when you've got a country with 1 billion people all replicating, right, if you don't impose any controls, the population will grow too fast. So you just say, you can have a kid. I'm not stopping you from having a kid, but you can only have one, right? And you do that because you can then, right, using probably some statistical methods, right, of what proportion of people are actually going to have a kid, et cetera, you can pretty well predict what your growth rate is going to be. All this then helps us then, and you can do it not because you're like a prude and you say, I want to control your sex life, right? Here you're trying to do it because you want to control the population growth rate to say, right, China, compare 1979, right? To be successful in China, so we're talking about 40 years ago, 45 years ago. To be successful in China, to be a successful young adult, ready to be married, you basically had to own 2 things, a watch and a bicycle. That was what, as a male trying to court a female, that is what you had to have to be a person respectable enough to marry some mean old man's daughter, right? That he wouldn't be as mean to you if you had your own bicycle and you had your own watch, because those were basically the things you needed to succeed. Obviously, that would not be enough for today. Standards have changed, right, in terms of what the needs are of people, and then also the tools for success. But that illustrates for you just even how much China, the economy, which is poised in about 4 or 5 years to become the world's largest economy, how they went from, it's still a communist country, but no market existing to something that exists today, all because of new growth theory. So I think that deserves a Nobel Prize. So let's look at what the solo growth theory is. Let's start with a closed economy. We're also going to make this a little bit easier, and we're going to say that there's no government here for right now, just to keep it a little simple. So we're not going to say there's no government spending. There's obviously government policies, but there's no government spending on goods and services and no taxation. But now labor is no longer fixed and capital is no longer fixed. So now both of those are adjusting. Think back to the classical model, right? In the classical model, we assumed some things were fixed, right, in terms of like our labor stock, right? And we allowed capital to grow. Now we're allowing both capital and labor to change. And we're trying to find some optimal way at which they should change, right? That's kind of what we're trying to do with new growth theory. We want to find an optimal population growth rate. And yes, there's something that's taking away from capital, depreciation, but there's also something that's adding to investment, which is the same as savings. So we need to find some optimal rate at which the capital stock changes and some optimal rate at which we should grow the population. It's like what's that nursery rhyme? The one where it's like, where they all have to eat that food and the food's too cold, hot. That nursery. Isn't there like a nursery rhyme or a fable or? We all learned that when I was a kid. I don't remember it. Remember, like, the girl breaks into the guy's house and she eats some, like...
The bears and the Goldilocks and the bears?
Yeah. Goldilocks. Yeah. Right? And those bears have, like, I don't know why they're eating porridge, right? But, yeah, porridge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right? Too hot, too cold, just right. And that's exactly what you could say here. Right? That a country... China did not have to be where it is, and they would not be where it is. Quite honestly, they would not be where they were if they weren't a communist country in 1979. They could say to people, dude, you can't have more than one kid. We'll know if you do, and you'll totally go to jail if you do, right? I mean, you can't pull that off in a non-communist country, right? I mean, no one would let that fly. In Ethiopia, you're not saying you can only have one kid, but basically, if you empower both men and women, right, women will take since they bear the brunt of unfortunate decisions made in that time period, right, teenage years and early 20s. If you empower everyone to, hey, you can have a good life if you, don't let people take advantage of you in that kind of way, right, and that there's protections for different kinds of things, you can control the population. Same with capital stock. I can encourage investment, as they did in China, by building a stock market, right, which encourages people to buy bonds, to buy equities. I can encourage people to save money through tax policy, et cetera, et cetera. So what's cool about this model is that, yeah, Robert Solow wins the Nobel Prize, but he does it not doing anything really that different, because all it is something, basically an extension of, or some slight alterations to the classical model, which is the first thing we did in this class. I'm not saying Robert Solow took the easy route to the Nobel Prize, but it does make economics seem really cool because it builds on each other. It builds on top of each other.
Wait, are these the assumptions right here?
Yeah, these are assumptions. We're just gonna. These are not the Solow assumptions, but we're using them so that you can get your first introduction to the Solow model. Then we can start relaxing them. So we're gonna do this because honestly, the Solow model isn't cool if you can't do fiscal, and we're gonna do that later. We got 60 slides to do it now, so we'll start to relax these assumptions a bit. For right now, we'll just go in there. Okay. So let's look at our production function, which you've already seen before and isn't that interesting. Now, lowercase versus uppercase is very important. So if you're note taking, highlight the fact of what is uppercase and lowercase. Big K, big L is total capital, total labor. So total output is a function of the total capital stock and the total labor stock. Now, that's not that important though, because as we even saw in the classical model, what's more important is little y and little k, which would be my output per worker, my capital per worker, which is simply just an average, right? Total output divided by my number of workers, that would obviously be my output per worker. Total capital per worker would just be my total capital stock divided by my labor. And then if we just make this really simple and we make an assumption of constant returns to scale, what that means is that if I increase my capital stock by 20%, I get 20% more output. So constant returns to scale basically just says, if I double my inputs, I get double my output. If I double my input, I double my outputs. That's what constant returns to scale refers to. Then we get the assumption that we've already seen before, which is that output per worker is a function of capital per worker. We've already seen, we saw that in our very earliest chapters here, that output per worker, little y, is a function of capital per worker. Output per worker is a function of capital per worker. I don't know what I would do in Japan. Aren't there those cafes where you can like eat with cats?
Yes.
Is that what you're gonna do?
Yes.
Yeah, but you gotta drag the whole gang, or are they gonna do their own thing? Or no?
Wow.
See, this is the problem. Levi, I think you better bring someone. Don't bring me, but I'm saying you should bring someone with you that you can hang with. Maybe Leroy. You should ask him if he's been to Japan. I don't know how you raise the issue, but you should probably ask him if he wants to go to Japan. Make him buy his own ticket, of course, but, you know, shouldn't be that bad. Okay. Now, we've seen this before, that the, if we want to look at the marginal productivity of capital, MPK, then basically that would say, how much output do I have when I have K plus 1 minus what I had previously? So that's just telling me my margin, right? If I had a little bit more and you subtract what I previously had, how much did it increase by with one more worker? But what we see, and we've talked about this before, is that there's diminishing marginal productivity of capital. As we get more capital per worker, you can have such a thing as too much capital per worker. How many computers do you really need in your office? Or screens or something. So if you look at this, you can clearly have overinvestment. I mean, we don't typically find businesses today that are lacking internet access, right? Now, what you're basically saying, right, if we just use this Appalachian example, right, is that West Virginia used to be something like right here, then through like human capital, like Head Start, education, all those things, that's where you start pushing it to the right, right? One of the biggest projects that they did in Appalachia was that they created this thing called the Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA. And what the TVA does is it basically created electricity, cheap electricity using water. Well, electricity is exactly the thing you want if you have capital, because, right, you need electricity to run machines. You need electricity to light buildings. You need electricity for people to go to school and to learn things. So access to cheap electricity is definitely a way to increase your capital per worker. Expensive electricity, like here in Hawaii, obviously limits that output per worker.
What is MPK?
Marginal productivity of capital. Marginal productivity of capital. So that would be the slope of this capital per worker. So if this is saying how much output do I get as a function of the capital per worker? But basically, workers with more capital still produce more stuff per worker, but just not as much as they would, a little bit less. Most of the gains, obviously you can see this is increasing at a decreasing rate. That's our MPK part of portfolio capital. I have a printer in my office, and I have a printer one floor up. I have access to a printer in that building. I probably have too many accesses to printers. I've got 3 computers in my office. I only really use one at a time, right? I don't have multiple machines.
So you just get more people.
Yeah, so in my case, right, I have one computer that I take to meetings, one computer that I use in my office on an everyday basis, and then one, like, if I have to, like, video chat with, like, my mother or something, that I would use that. You know, basically separate things out. Now, again, keeping it easy, getting rid of government spending. What that then means is that we need to look at the income side of this. Remember, income equals output. Again, making this easy, so it's not going to be, this is a closed economy, so there's no NX, and we're saying there's no G. So we're going to just eliminate government spending just to make our life easy. So that's why here then total output, which is also total income, meaning Y is both income as well as output. The total income or total output is equal to consumption plus investment. The total output or total income, whichever you want to use here, total income or total output, that's both what Y means, capital Y. Capital Y is total output, but it's also total income. Capital Y is total income as well as total output. It's a closed economy, so there's no NX. And the further assumption for now is that this is an economy that does not have government spending or taxation. So that's why there's no G or T. That's why it's only Y equals C plus I. Meaning total income is equal to consumption plus investment. Well, then all we simply do on the second bullet point is just start dividing things by our total labor stock. So we have an idea of then our income per worker or output per worker. Because what we're saying here then, why is it important that people produce more stuff? Because it means that on average, people have more average income. Right? So that we can actually say that, again, we have poor people in the United States, but the poorest person now is richer than the poorest person 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Right? That the little y is bigger than it was 20 or 30 years ago. The little y is bigger than it was 20 or 30 years ago. So little y, which is output per worker or income per worker, is equal to consumption per worker plus investment per worker. Little c plus little I.
So small picture, big picture.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. Does anybody have kids?
I don't know.
No, you should find it out, because I would suspect it would be a great, I'm sure my son would think I had the greatest job in the world if I serviced vending machines. He can't pass a vending machine without salivating. Is that how you were as a kid? Eva? Is that how you were as a kid? I'm just trying to predict how my son's going to be. Because you seem to have like me, a strong fascination with vending machines right now, and the food that comes from it.
Yeah, I think I was like that. But
So like father like son, I guess in this case.
But like I had a sister who stole all my snacks and everything. So
Yeah.
I just got used to not having.
Wait, the one that I met?
Yeah.
Oh, we totally should have told me that before. I would have given her a really hard time and made her regret it.
Yeah. She just steal all my
man.
ice cream and snacks. I just got used to not eating sweets at all.
She's never come to class again.
Now I can't eat sweets really. I want to have urges to do it.
Did you want to cry? It was so sad. I really would have given her a hard time and made her regret it.
I don't need to cry. It's okay.
Well, I'm crying. Okay. Now, You notice that we've rarely talked about savings in this class? We really just said before, income could only go to two sources, taxation and to spending. We really haven't talked about savings, marginal propensity to save. I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but not very much. But we need to actually talk about savings now because that's the active way that we actually try to replace the capital that's being lost every year due to depreciation. So our savings rate then is going to be a little less. It's going to be basically the proportion that we're willing to save every month out of our income. And so then obviously my amount of consumption, the rate at least of my consumption is going to be 1 minus what percent of the income that I actually save times my total income. So for instance, if I save 20% of my income, then I'll basically spend 80%, right? Because little s would be 0.2. That would mean that then I'm going to, 1 minus little s would be 0.8. So we would do things to change the savings rate. Now in the United States, we primarily do that through tax policy, right? There's huge tax incentives to save money for healthcare expenses, right? Through HSAs and FSAs, flexible spending accounts and health savings accounts. We encourage people to save for retirement through 401ks, 403bs, and we do that again through tax policy. And we encourage people to invest money in their own business, right? By giving them like deductions for business expenses, et cetera, et cetera. So with that said, we need to then say what would then be the amount of savings per worker. So savings per worker, S, let's just rearrange the terms. Savings per worker would then just be my total income, right, minus my consumption. Because I'm saying again, my income can only go to two things. This is income. My income can only go to two things. It can either go to spending, consumption, or it could go to savings, S. So if I rearrange the original term here would be Y equals C plus S, essentially, right? Y equals C plus S. Well, income equals consumption plus savings. In this idealized world, that's the only two things you can do with your income. You can either spend it, consume it, or save it, S. So rearrange those terms so that S then equals Y minus C, right? I just subtract C, I'm sorry, subtract, well, yeah, why not do it that way? Subtract C from both sides, right? If I subtract C from both sides, then I'd have Y minus C equals S. But we also know that C, little c, as we just determined on the previous slide, little c is equal to 1 minus S times Y. So let's substitute. And the reason why we want to do that is because we want to remove an unknown. So now we can actually solve this, right? So that's our savings per worker is little s times Y, which is the same as savings, right? Our investment is going to be the same as savings, which means if I then say not Y equaling C plus S, but instead Y equaling C plus I, substituting I for S or S for I, then we can say that investment is also equal to little s times Y, that our investment basically equals our savings rate times the amount of income that we have. Which means that it's also equal to S f of k, because Y is the same as f of k. That's the third bullet point down here. So the third bullet point, what I altered there was saying, instead of saying I equals S of Y, if we go back, I think it was on 2 slides before this, right, where y equals f of k. Just substitute the y for f of k. And the reason why we do that, the reason why the last bullet point or the last thing on this is so important is because you want to have something where you're saying that investment is then is determined by the savings rate, essentially. Where investment is determined, the amount of investment is determined by the savings rate. Which means China's got a lot of problems right now. And one of their problems is that people save too much money. Same with Japan. People save too much money in Japan. And that's the whole point of Abenomics. So that'll be my reason. Leroy and I will go. What do you think he likes to do in his free time? Did he say? What do he likes to do in his free time?
Oh no.
Oh.
Probably TV.
What?
Probably TV.
TV idea. Yeah. It's definitely a problem in China and in Japan right now that the people save too much money. And all you can really do then is try to find policies that encourage people to spend more money, which is going to be hard to do because if it's in your mentality to not spend a lot of money, it's going to be hard to then just push you to start spending lots of money. You're going to think that it's wasteful and pointless. I'll pause here and wait. Anyone that needs to finish writing. This is probably the most play Leroy's ever gotten in any class taught at this university, I think. I saw 2 Halloween movies this past weekend. Nightmare Before Christmas, it was my first time seeing it. And then I found out it came out 25 years ago. It was my first time seeing it. Mm-hmm. And then I saw Boo, A Medea Halloween, which was also really good. I actually liked it. And then my wife and I saw A Star is Born. That was like a new movie. Yeah, the Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper movie. My wife cried. I'm sure Leroy would have cried too. Probably not. Okay. Now, let's graph this out. So here's our original y, f of k, where you can see the diminishing marginal productivity of capital, MPK being the slope of this. The savings rate, S f of k, that's just going to be basically the proportion. If we use my simplified example, this would be 20% of that, right? If I just said savings rate was equal to 20.2. Which means that the difference that savings is equal to investment, and investment plus something else, consumption, has to equal total output. Right, so there's 2 ways you could say this. Y, if you're talking about it from income's perspective, income equals consumption plus savings, but it's also output, right, equaling consumption goods plus investment goods. 2 things going on here at the same time. This will be an important graph. You're going to see cooler things done with this, but the Y again can stand for either income or output. I is equal to S, and the difference between the I and the S and Y is C. The Japanese really love their trains, don't they? Have you been to Japan?
I've been to China.
Yeah, I've been to China. I haven't been to Japan. But I was watching a TV. You know, like on that one, it was like that one station on Spectrum Cable where they do like Japanese NHK. They were talking about a yellow train apparently, which is like super special.
I've never heard of that.
I don't know.
My favorite train was the train Tokyo Disney. Because it was like a Disneyland train.
Like that looks like Mickey Mouse or something, or like.
And the insides were all like different characters.
Oh, I got you, yeah. And you take it probably exclusively then from like Tokyo to Disneyland, right?
It's kind of like from the like parking lot
Yeah.
to the entrance.
Oh, kind of like the Pearl City Mall kind of thing.
Like a tram.
I always wondered about the Pearl City Mall, whether the Japanese imposed that on us, that monorail train thing. I don't know. Okay. Now let's add to this graph. And let's add to this graph depreciation. This is a lowercase in Greek, right? This is our lowercase d for depreciation. This is just saying that the capital wears out. Now, this is in somewhat sense an assumption here, but let's just say that the capital wears out at a constant rate. So this is basically what's going to take away from our capital every year. As we get more capital, we'll have more total depreciation. Oh, there's a lot of people at the volleyball game.
Yeah, it's always like, well, what is that?
Yeah, it's a volleyball game for breast cancer awareness. I gave total extra credit for my principal's class. I think we'll have to check and see who's there.
Did you give us some of the? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, you have to form a team. You have to get 6 people. Even if we all joined a team right now.
5 and then.
And then who?
Leroy.
Leroy. Thank you. No, I want Leroy to join. No, but I'm glad you integrated him into the class further. Again, total amount of love. He's getting no more love than this man in any class. Okay. This is pretty important here because this helps us then form a optimal government policy in terms of investment, which basically tells us that if the capital stock is changing and it's the amount that it changes is the difference between how much I'm adding to it, which is the investment part of it, minus the thing that's taking away from it, depreciation. Obviously, if that difference is a positive difference, then the capital stock grows, right? Basically, if investment is greater than depreciation, capital stock grows. If depreciation is greater than investment, then obviously the capital stock shrinks. Sometimes you see arguments like that made with our roads and our bridges and things like that, where people say, like, obviously depreciation is really easy to see. Roads get potholes, right? Dams burst, that kind of shit, right? And we can obviously patch holes, and we can obviously build new roads. The question is, are the roads depreciating faster than we're building better ones or building new ones? Right? And the general argument is, well, at least in Hawaii, is that we're not, right? That some roads are pretty bad.
So SK is total depreciation? Not SK, sorry, that symbol.
Delta K, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Also change in K equals.
So total change in K, delta K, is equal to the total amount of investment, which is the same as our savings times F of K, minus the symbol there, that's our lowercase d in Greek terms. So our basically our this is a uppercase d in Greek terms, and this is a lowercase d in Greek terms. Doesn't matter. Basically, this term, lowercase d in Greek terms, times the amount of capital stock, that's being subtracted from the total amount of savings. Okay, so now we get to what solar basically is saying. This equation then, which basically tells us the rate at which capital changes by, that rate is also determined by other things. that's the cool thing about this, is that the capital per worker is affected by, obviously, our consumption patterns, but it's also affected by our total income. So a lot of things depend on that are determining our level of capital stock. We're not just throwing capital stock out there randomly. In fact, it's determined by other things which also contain capital. Right? So it becomes, instead of an exogenous variable, it becomes an endogenous variable, meaning it's not coming from outside the system how much capital we have. Rather, different countries accumulate different amounts of capital because those countries can structure themselves to encourage capital accumulation or not. Why does Mexico have less capital per worker than the United States? It's not geography, right? I mean, it's basically the same geography, and yet for some reason the roads in Mexico are worse. There's not as, when we think of like, you know, fancy types of industries, like high technology kinds of industries, we're not thinking of Mexico, right? Or even compare San Francisco to Oklahoma, right? I mean, there's an example even on a statewide basis in terms of capital accumulation. It all feeds back into the system itself, such that your everything is being determined by our capital per worker. And the capital per worker itself can be determined by policies, which would mean if I can raise the capital per worker, I can raise consumption and I can raise income, meaning I can fix global poverty by determining the appropriate little k amount. That's the solo growth model for us. I'll pause here for a moment to see if I can see.
Wait. So wait, FFK
Yep.
is not capital?
No, it is. That's this right here. Y equaling f of k.
Oh.
No, f of k.
F of K is the output of worker?
Output per worker. Capital per worker, sorry. Output per worker is a function of capital per worker. Output per worker, little y, is a function of capital per worker, little k. Output per worker is a function of capital per worker. Which means I should be able to find then. One thing I should be able to find is what's called a steady state. You can also think of it as an equilibrium. But I should be able to find then an amount of capital per worker that will create just enough savings to offset depreciation. I'll repeat that again. I should be able to find then an amount of capital per worker. I should be able to find an amount of capital per worker that will generate just enough savings to exactly cover depreciation. I should be able to find an amount of little k, meaning capital per worker. I should be able to find an amount of capital per worker that will generate savings or additional investment, basically. I should be able to find a capital per worker that will generate savings that's just enough to offset the depreciation, which would mean that the delta k is equal to 0. Because, you know, in essence, an equilibrium. It's wearing out just as fast as I'm replacing it. Wearing out just as fast as I'm replacing it. So let's call that k stop. Again, if you like to turn this back from principles, basically it's an equilibrium point. So I'm just looking for an equilibrium point. Some point where the capital per worker, the savings rate from that is just enough to offset depreciation. Oh, wait. Don't forget to look at your classes for next semester. Intermediate micro will be the next class, which I'm also going to offer once a week. I think it's easiest kind of around this time. Which means, sorry, we used to do that. No. Which means, if we tried to graphically describe what was on the previous slide, essentially we're looking for this point, right? Putting together all the graphs that we've seen so far. Here was our depreciation, which was a constant rate, right? And basically we're saying, if we are in this region, what's happening to the capital, delta K? What's happening to delta K over here? Is delta K positive, 0, or negative? Delta K positive, 0, or negative?
Right there at that point.
Yeah, this region right here.
Delta K is positive.
Correct. Saving rate exceeds depreciation. 0 and then negative. So you can see right here, you can clearly save too much, or you can basically save too much or save too little, obviously. But there is some optimal amount of capital per worker that you want the government to put policies in place to encourage people to do that, right? So there clearly is a role for government to manipulate the economy to do this. Because well, you can manipulate it if you think it's going to take too long. Because what's going to happen here is that slowly over time, it will, of course, move to the equilibrium. Because if I'm over here, the capital stock will grow, right, slowly over time. And over here, it's going to get destroyed, so it's going to be brought to this equilibrium. But, dude, people are going to die, right, in the time it takes you to move from one to the other, right? So you might just want to speed it up, right, and just impose K star right away, rather than waiting for us to achieve this equilibrium. You might want to push things a little faster to get the K star. Again, you're not learning that old of macro right now. This is only about 35 years old, which, you know, in the scheme of things isn't that old. Okay, I don't need to do this. If you want, you can look at the slides on your own, and you can just see what I just said just now. So you don't need anything from me more about that. I'll leave it here for a second if you want to add it to your graph, but it's just explaining what I just said. Again, total S is equal to investment. That's why investment is going from. Investment is the sole portion. It's being taken away by depreciation, which leaves us a difference of delta K, which is a positive number.
Y-axis is investment and depreciation.
Yeah, just the amount of it. I could have just as easily put dollars, you know, just the dollar symbol there, if you wanted. Okay. Okay. Levi, how you good or almost?
Just copying.
Yeah, no worries. I'll wait. Okay. I'm not going to go through. You can follow the slides here, but this is just saying what I just said now too, right? Which is, if the capital stock is growing, then you're going to see that moves us further to the right, getting us closer to the equilibrium. And it keeps happening. It gets us closer to the equilibrium until we get the K star. Okay, so you don't need, you know, look at slides 19 through 23 to see that movement towards K star. My only thing I was saying was that moving to K star happens over time. So you may just want to speed it up rather than waiting for it to happen naturally on its own. Because again, people are going to die or growth is going to be compromised in that time. Okay, I'm not going to do that. Okay, let's take a break right now. I'm going to check on the volleyball game because I've got kids earning extra credit, and then we'll come back in like 10 minutes to resume with this. Slide 26. Okay, so let's pause. Pause here. Okay. And let's pause our video. Yeah, see, here we go. There we go. See. Leroy.
What?
I'm gonna go check on them. You can go there too?
No, I'm going to stop.
Why'd you just come? Look at it.
Okay,
Who's gonna come in here? I mean, you want one fruit and nuts and then one string cheese?
Christian, are you taking 312 with?
I took 212 already.
Oh,
We
wait.
do the changes.
Oh, who's your teacher for 312?
McLaurin.
Oh, McNally.
McNary, She was alright.
She was okay.
Like the biggest part was like her homework.
Oh, how many attempts did you get in Wiley class?
I don't remember. It was a good amount because like I always got like 100% of the homework.
I think her and Linegraph were teaching it.
Levi has Katie Linegraph right now.
312.
Yeah, he likes her.
Online.
Right now I'm taking Pluto.
Oh, Frank Pluto.
What do you do with your pets while you're gone?
Oh,
You have dogs, right? You
I
have
have
little
dogs.
dogs, right?
my aunt is gonna watch her.
Who's not going on the trip?
Huh?
She's not going on the trip. Who's all going on the trip again?
Just my mom and dad and sister, and his mom and sister.
You know, when you went to the Philippines, didn't you bring a lot of people with you?
No, I'm just brought my mom and dad.
Oh,
And
that's easy.
Yeah.
But Levi was born in Japan, so like we're also gonna see his grandpa and his grandma in Japan.
How long was he there? Was he just born and then like left right away, or how
He
long
was
is it?
born, I think he did kindergarten.
Do you think you'll try to find some of his old school friends?
Probably not. 'Cause
No.
he went to Osaka like 3 times too with his family.
Mm-hmm.
But he says he doesn't really know any of his relatives, like his mom and know them.
Mm. I don't know what I'm doing for spring break. I want to do something. What do you want to do for spring break?
I have no idea.
Maybe we should go on a trip together. We'll go to, where do you want to go?
Fuck out.
Going in
I don't
December,
even
though,
have
not
any
during
passports
spring.
or anything.
Okay, then we'll go to Maui.
I've never. I don't think I've ever been out of the country
But you've been to the mainland before, right?
several times.
Okay.
Because my dad was military.
Okay. And you don't have a passport? And all that time you stayed stateside? You didn't go anywhere?
No,
Mm.
not really.
Hmm.
The last place I was Louisiana.
Oh, that sucks. Was he Army or
Yeah,
Marine? Oh,
Army.
okay. There's a lot of people in the Army that are all stuck in Louisiana. Every time I have like a friend, they all seem to be in Louisiana.
I mean, it's one of the
Is
bigger
it the big
bases.
base?
It's
Oh
a
yeah,
big-
there's that really big
It has a
Barksdale. Is that what it
ROTC
is?
program.
What's the base the really big base, Army base that's in? Is that Barksdale or is that in?
Oh, Louisiana?
Yeah.
No, it's Polk.
Oh,
Fort
Polk. Okay. Okay.
In Leesville.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds. Honestly, I've only been to New Orleans, so it's not saying very much for it.
I've been almost everywhere in Louisiana except for New Orleans.
Yeah, The Economist used to be able. So The Economist meet once a year, and we used to meet in Atlantic City. So the only reason why you go to Atlantic City is like old school gambling, right? Like that was like before Vegas became big. People went to Atlantic City, and I had my bachelor party in Atlantic City. I remember that. The Economists used to meet there until we got kicked out like a decade ago because we were gambling too much. But economists were really good at math, so they were basically counting cards and like always winning, and then we got kicked out. So now we go to New Orleans where you can do gambling. I don't know, but maybe they get. I don't know. Maybe New Orleans does a better job of getting people drunker so that they actually lose money, maybe, or I don't know.
I don't know. From what I know, that sounds like Bourbon Street. But
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Oh, Bourbon Street. Yeah, that's the equivalent of saying Waikiki is Hawaii. Bourbon Street. Wait, and then I went to a wedding once, and so get this. This sounds like a crazy wedding. Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, so imagine a woman meeting a man. They are both from different parts originally. She was from Michigan. He was from India. Okay, so different, different parts of the world, but different locations. They then meet each other in St. Louis. They buy a house in St. Louis. He had lived in St. Louis for a really long time. She came to St. Louis because of college. So they live in St. Louis for a long time. Before they get engaged, they decide they're going to take a trip to New Orleans. They go to New Orleans. He proposes to her in New Orleans, and then they're going to go home. Because that's not too unusual, proposing in a vacation destination and going back and doing the thing. But then they plan a wedding to occur in New Orleans. That just seems really complicated. Like, it's complicated enough to plan a wedding when you live there, like.
yeah.
I don't know. So they had a wedding
Maybe they
in
were
New
like
Orleans
New Orleans.
that they didn't have programs. They had a really shitty location. My oldest son was supposed to be the ring bearer, but we got there late because they didn't give us good directions. And yeah, so it seemed like a pretty cool way. All of us can see. Oh, was he there? He wasn't there. Oh, but you bought the fig bars. Good.
Yeah,
Good job.
it's not the original, but
Oh, wait, did you tell him flavors you wanted, or what did you do?
yeah, there's the fig bars, but all of them were like inferior to the original fig bar. That's actually fig flavored.
So what did you ask for? You asked for
I
original
asked for
flavor?
the original fig flavored one, which is by far the best one.
What about those Oreos you can buy in a big box? Like, you know the ones I'm talking about, the ones that are in the yellow container thing, the one that, like the name brand ones. What's the name brand
Oreos?
one called? No, the name brand of the fig bars. There's like
Fig
a name.
Newtons.
What?
Fig Newtons.
Yeah, Fig Newtons. Yeah, what are Fig Newtons flavored?
The
regular
those
ones.
original figs, but they taste a little like candy rather than like something like it tastes like good as like nourishing.
No.
And it's a kind of like, I don't know what it is, but there's something about the wheat in this one. There's like a slight crunch to it. It kind of like makes it taste good, but it's only good the original one.
And that's still not being stocked up.
No, and it's hard to find for some reason. But
When did you tell him this?
probably yesterday.
Oh, so okay, so he's working on it.
Yeah.
He's devising a plan right now. Okay. I'm gonna skip to 16. That way I can speak through this. Okay. One for Kristen. A month left.
So we have one more exam and that's it already.
Yeah, so we have this one that's due on the 1st, so next week, and then, yeah, then I'll just basically make the final. That will be done in the same structure, do our finals period. We only have a few more topics to go, honestly, so, I mean, we'll be done on time. We'll actually be done on time.
Oh, done on time, okay.
Yeah. Well, that probably is, if I do what I'm supposed to do. Yeah.
Mhm.
I met 2 people in the past 2 weeks that have 4 kids. I just think it's crazy. Like, you know, I just have 2 kids, and it just seems really crazy. People have 4 kids, but they don't seem more tired.
My
than I
teacher
am.
in elementary school has
Yeah.
9 kids.
Yeah, my father was one of 8. My mother was one of 6.
That's crazy.
Yeah, my sister has 2 kids, and I don't think she's having any more. We're at 2. My wife's already talking number 3, dude.
Really?
Yeah, we only had the other kid 9 months ago. How can you be talking about number 3 already? Are you kidding me? Like,
Damn.
Nice family that has like 10.
yeah. Well,
They-
you know, you have to start early, right? I'm not disputing that. You know, my wife is 31, so she's got time to still replicate. But dude, I'm getting tired. You know, like I haven't slept in a long.
That's a lot of kids.
That's a lot of kids. You just have one sister.
Yes.
Yeah, she was a bully to you too, so you probably say you're better off. Oh wait, what do you have? One sister, brother?
Older sister.
What do you have?
I have 5 siblings, all younger.
Wow, how'd your parents do it?
I don't know.
Does your dad seem like a tired man, or did your mom do most of the work?
Well, I mean, he was in the army, so a
Yeah,
lot
so
of
he
his was at work.
Yeah, and when he gets done, you know, yeah, that's
Yeah.
crazy. I don't know. How did you feel to be one of 6?
We got it.
Yeah,
How'd you
it's
get it?
all right, I guess. I was the oldest, so.
What was
I
the
got the
breakdown?
bar. It
Lots
was next to
of
it.
girls, lots of
Down.
boys. What was
On
it?
that one.
Well, we alternated.
They did.
Boy, girl, and then the last
You
one, the
think the
6th
bars
one,
worked it?
ended the cycle, so it was boy.
Yeah.
Oh, this is
I don't know, so what would you say?
We can do this.
Number 3. Seems like a lot of work. So what was the age difference between you and the next oldest?
About 2 years.
Well, I got it.
Which means that they started about a year after. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Okay.
She just skill shotted this out of the vending machine.
What'd you get?
Okay, so here's what happened.
Yeah.
That vending machine
Yeah. Oh, the bandit. I call it the bandit because
had the cheese on top,
yeah.
so you can't get it
Yeah.
by circling the ring. It's just stuck there.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
other one
Yeah.
didn't work. It's just like offline.
I know. Yeah. No, the other one there too. It always gets it wrong with that Texas, the Texas treat thing. That big
The
Texas.
bun thing.
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
not much in the bun.
Yeah. That thing is horrible with the Texas bun thing.
Anyway, so I can get it out, right?
Yeah.
So
She's got small
she
hands.
walked in here and
Yeah.
she got the cheese out apparently. What she did, she ordered a thing next to it
Yeah.
for the same price, and when the rings turned around,
Yeah.
knocked both of them into the container. So she skill shotted it.
This is like total
Is that badass or what?
the claw machine at Walmart kind of thing.
So she literally paid,
Yeah, but she had to buy a stupid bar that probably isn't
but she
that
paid
yummy.
it once and got two.
Yeah, but the other thing that you got isn't that good. I would have just gotten the string cheese.
Yeah, but
If you had tried to order string cheese, would you have gotten 4?
Mhm.
Would you have gotten 4
there's
string?
no more string cheese.
Oh, it was the last. Okay.
But it was like not in the.
Yeah. Well, someone else got screwed, so you'll get screwed now. Karma says. Okay, so let's look at how the math of this looks. So what if I gave you a production function that was square root of k and l? Something to the square root is the same as saying it's the 1/2 power exponent wise. Which would mean that if I try to rearrange the terms and make my big Y into a little y, that would be y divided by l, right? That's what changes it to a little y, right? Then that would mean that I'm taking big K to the 1/2, L to the 1/2, and dividing it by L, right? That's what changes it into per worker terms, right? Dividing it by L. Well, this is to the 1/2, this is to the first, right? Which means
1/2 minus 1.
1/2, exactly, 1/2 minus 1, which means that it's now, right,
A negative 1/2.
a negative 1/2. Exactly.
And then you just pull out 1/2 on the outside.
Mhm.
There should be parentheses around the K and L.
Yeah,
No K over L.
yeah, exactly, right here.
Anyone doesn't see that.
Kristen, if you're feeling so desired. Weren't you our person that was doing it before? Someone feeling desired could add a.
Yeah, both me and her were doing it.
Yeah. There. So then the only other thing we have to do here is remember K over L is the same as little k.
Oh.
Exactly. So this would be how we could find up to here, given that production function, how much they should, what this looks like in per worker terms. But then, adding to that, now let's say I give you some terms. Let's say, now given that function we just determined, let's say that the savings rate is 0.3, the depreciation rate is 0.1, and that I'm stuck initially with capital per worker of 4. So 4 units of capital per worker. So let's just assume these numbers here exist. Savings 0.3, depreciation 0.1, capital stock 4. Then, I'll wait for everyone to copy. Is 4.
All right.
Then, if I start putting the terms in here, sorry, this, Kristen, you should circle this and shift it over. This is, sorry, the columns got shifted somehow. This is supposed to be K, this is supposed to be Y, this is supposed to be C, this is supposed to be I, this is supposed to be K, this is supposed to be delta K. Sorry, it just got shifted. I can't explain why.
There's no delta in there. The last one.
Yeah, yeah, delta. The difference between the K's. And we're missing, yeah, you're missing the lowercase d.
Yep.
That's a lot of mistakes in this. Shift everything over. We're missing a uppercase Greek letter D. That would be this. And we're missing a lowercase d Greek term. That would be this. The difference between savings, which is the same as capital per worker, and depreciation is a difference of 0.2. And so the capital stock there is growing by 0.2. It grows by 0.2. That's what makes this right here. So now it's 4.2. Which then I keep going on. It grew by 0.195, so now I add 0.195. Grows to 0.189, so add 0.189, et cetera, until I get my steady state, where the delta was 0. So now I know what's the actual amount of capital per worker that creates a steady state. In this case, it's 9. If we go back, and I'll go back to the graph, don't worry, but that would be, the 9 would be right here. That would be my K star. So basically, remember all those other slides previously, 23, 22, 21, those slides? That was all that incremental increase up to 9. This is a getting closer to the steady state.
Oh, I can see why we want it now.
Yeah, so exactly. So now, right, we can, if we still have these numbers here, and now our S of k is k to the 1/2, right? Now we can solve for all these values. We don't have to make a chart like this. Instead, we can just directly compute things. So let's do that. So what do we know a steady state is? We know that a steady state is where, in this case, sorry, delta k, took out the delta, but our delta k is equal to 0, right? Triangle k equals 0. That's what a steady state is. And to get a steady state, then we know, and sorry, I took out the lowercase d as well, but to get the steady state, we know then that the savings amount should equal the depreciation amount. So I took out the delta, the lowercase d here. Okay, now let's just plug in the numbers that I gave you, which was 0.3 for savings. That k was equal to k to the 1/2, which is the same as square root of k, equals depreciation, which was 0.1 times k. Okay, so let's start first by multiplying each side by 10. That turns my 0.3 into 3. That turns my 0.1 into 1. So the 1 is obviously doesn't have to appear anymore. Then, right, let's, in this case now, let's turn it to the form where let's isolate our, let's divide each side by 1. So now I'm stuck with 3 over 1, which is the equivalent of my 3. And now I have k to the first on the left-hand side, square root of k on the, sorry, on the left-hand side, right-hand side, square root of k on the left-hand side, divide each side by square root of k. And so now I would have k to the first over k to the 1/2, which leaves me with square root of k, right? Or k to the 1/2 in the numerator. What would k need to be to get 3? 9, right? 3 times 3 is 9. That's a much easier way to get k equal to 9. A much easier way to get k equal to 9. And once you know that k is equal to 9, then you can determine consumption, which in this case is going to be C star equals 1 minus S times Y. The savings rate is 3, so that would mean I'm left with 0.7. That y is equal to 3, right? Because that's what square root of 9 is 3. So 0.7 times 3 is equal to 2.1. So that's how much people should now consume in my economy to reach the steady state, is 2.1. That should be my consumption per worker. This is a much easier way than doing that whole big chart of just solving it mathematically. I'll give you a relatively simple example on the exam, and I'll try to give you actually a practice one before that, so that makes it a little easier for you. Went to a movie on a Sunday morning. It was like the best thing ever. I'm usually a Saturday night moviegoer, and this past Saturday was my wife and I's 6th anniversary, and we were like, "Oh yeah, we'll totally go to a movie on Saturday night." And then it just got really late, and then something happened, and we just didn't go. Like, okay, we'll just go Sunday morning. I got to we were at a ward. We got to park in the actual structure. Like, we never get a spot in the structure.
Mm-hmm.
We got there 5 minutes late to the movie, but they do 10 minutes of previews. We still got there with enough time to park the car, buy a ticket, get concessions, and the movie was just starting. And we got middle seats in the middle of the theater. I'm gonna totally go to movies on Sunday mornings now. Yeah. Easy like Sunday morning. And your schedule looks so nice, man. Tuesday and Thursday.
Oh, yeah.
That is a nice schedule. You must be up to no good Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
So this means the maximum output in this economy is 3.
No, it's 2.1.
2.1?
Is the consumption. Is that what you asked for?
No, I said the maximum output.
Yes, the maximum output in income is 3, yes.
Yeah,
Yep,
because
sorry, yep. Mm-hmm.
I realized on the past table
Yeah.
that why people want to have a steady state in the economy. I think that's when they can maximize their Y.
Mm-hmm. And there's our consumption of 2.1.
And they're just going to go downhill from there.
So it's basically the same thing. All we're just doing is doing the math, so we don't have to do this whole chart.
I dropped this class because it was too long. That's a 7 to 9:50 after this.
Oh,
There's no way I'm doing that.
which one was that?
That's
So
marketing.
Oh yeah, you don't need to do that. Yeah,
No way. I was like, no.
that would have been a long day.
Yeah. I was like, no.
You can't do that. Did you do it for a week? Didn't you?
No, I didn't even start out.
I can't do it. There's no way I
You
can
should
do
really
it.
rethink about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, look what happens when we change the savings rate. What if I now find a way to tell people save more money? Well, what that does, obviously, is it shifts up the S term from S1 to S2, but it also now shifts out my steady state. So there's now such a thing as saving too little and saving too much. Because the economy, no matter what, is going to go to K star. But now you can see with this is that based on different savings rate, there's almost like a menu of choices of different steady states, right? Because getting to K star is a natural process. Even if the government doesn't push us to K star faster, we will get to K star no matter what, just because, right, going to an equilibrium, right? Capital stock grows, shifts out to K per worker.
So just
Or
like
the
the
reverse.
kind of the invisible hand of this.
Exactly. So now if all of these are choices, let's say that the savings rate was a lot lower, like went through right here, let's say. Well, then clearly the steady state level of capital per worker would be really low as opposed to way over here. Which means that governments absolutely do have to care how much money people save. And you can be a country like the United States, which is typically known as a country that does not save enough money. We rely on the fact that there are Chinas and Japans in the world that save too much money, which is also a problem. Which means that in this model, we don't have an open economy, but fortunately in our world, we have an open economy, which means that our steady state isn't actually here. We're just relying on the fact that other countries are overcompensating for us or undercompensating.
But this is a closed economy.
This is a closed economy, exactly. But if we were a closed economy, you could definitely be stuck being poor forever, right? If your steady state was right here. Why is sub-Saharan Africa always so poor? This would be an explanation for that.
So wouldn't this cause like wouldn't this cause like a Great Depression of some sort?
No, but this would even be worse. This would be something like, why is it the case that for as long as we can all remember, Africa has been poor? Right? Yeah, there were the Egyptians, and right, there was God and stuff, or Jesus, right? But like, take it further back, right, or take it further forward, and Africa's always been a poor continent, generally speaking, right? Just like we could also say about like Central America, right? Honduras, and right, yeah, you had the Mayans and the Incas or whatever. Right? I don't know. One doesn't belong to that group I just said, but right, you got like Mayans and Incas and other groups that lived in Central and South America, but still poverty for decade after decade after decade.
Is it because their consumption is so high because of their population?
Right. Or the fact, or you could look at it the opposite way and just say they don't save that much, as much as they should. So the reason why you're not saving that much in Africa, read this way, would be, damn it, you're having too many kids, right? There's too many kids being born, which then means that your consumption has to be really high to support all of these kids, which means I can't save a lot of money, which means there's not going to be a lot of investment going on. Which means if my savings rate is low, I can't support that much capital. Which is exactly why China had to say, dude, we know there's not a lot going on in this country, but you can only have one kid, and that's it. Otherwise, the capital stock will be depleted by people having good times, right? And the population growing too large, larger than it can support. Then the only other thing you can do is tell people, get out of this country and go somewhere else, which is what China did with sending people to Africa. So that's kind of like the new outpost of China, is investing lots and lots of money in sub-Saharan Africa and sending people there as well. China's got to do something with all the money and all the people. Same with India. So that would mean if I save more money, my steady state level of capital per worker will be higher. And if my steady state level of capital per worker is higher, that'll also mean that my output per worker is higher. This is just what I said, the last bullet point, so I'm not going to repeat it again, but there it is, nicely typed up. Countries that save more money are going to be more stable in terms of their income. There's going to be less poverty. This is basically an explanation for wealth of nations. Why are some countries just always rich and why are some countries just always poor? Because of their steady state level of capital being a certain amount, either too low or too high. I hear that next semester we get to take classes in the new building.
Are you serious?
Yeah, so I think our class, intermediate micro, will be in the new building because we're small enough. There was this whole fight among professors trying to get offices there. I didn't really care. I don't want to move all my books. So
Yeah, you have your own office now because that professor doesn't even.
yeah, yeah, right.
I see.
Yeah, so I'm totally happy. And I'm right by a vending machine, so I get total face time to right all the time. Mhm.
Which makes it more wealthier.
Yes.
What's special about the new building?
About this about which building? New building? Or?
Yeah.
You really.
Like, what's the purpose of that?
The new building has got two purposes, two purpose. It is a administrative building. So right now, administrators are like interwoven throughout DE and Department of Hawaiian Homelands. They have like the top floor. So the bosses who basically control the money said, we need our own building. But then like the state said, dude, you can't have your own building. Like you got to share it because like you don't have enough classrooms as it is. So they built a joint purpose building. So this is both an administrative building, this new building, and it's a healthcare. So we're getting like the dental hygienist program from Manila and a few other like, and we're starting obviously a nursing program here, right? We have nurses on the second floor of this. All the people that are related to medical areas are all going to be in that new building.
Oh.
Yep. And then administrators, so like vice chancellor, chancellor, HR.
It's a big building.
Yeah, it's a big building. And so they already started to break ground on the new building now after that. So they're already starting that one.
Where's that going to be?
Right behind it, right in between the administrative building and the library. It's going to be right at the end of that. So that one's going to be creative media. So creative media right now is across the hall and kind of in the library, and they're going to have their own building. Then after that one is, they say education, but I don't see how they can do that.
It should make a business.
Well, that's the one that I think the numbers would justify as having more of, which would be a business building. And then after the education, maybe business, and then I think a humanities building. And obviously we're having a new parking lot.
Oh, the new students who's coming here.
They should make a building right over there, like right where they have a tall grass.
Yeah, well, they're building one now. So the one after creative media is going to be built at the corner of Farrington and wherever that stoplight thing. That's going to become an innovation building.
Why are they putting that way?
I don't know, but that's also supposed to be where the state film office is. So they're going to make like all movies and TV shows filmed on the islands have to go through the state film office, which is going to be on this campus now. So I'm going to basically be in the movies.
We're all going to graduate once off.
Yeah, you guys will be long gone. I'll still be here, plugging away, because it didn't save enough money.
Right when they make all these new buildings.
Yeah.
Do you think they're going to make students pay for parking afterwards?
Well, that's a tough one, because by state law, parking as a service has to be self-sustaining. So because we're lousy with land right now, they can still say there's no cost. It may, years and years and years and years from now, if they like actually built a structure like a garage, then you would have to charge. But right now, I mean, it sounds like a lot of money, but it's not. So they basically, this new parking lot is doubling the size, and it costs about $1 million. Now it seems like a lot, but you basically are getting like 600 or 700 more parking spots for $1 million, and you don't have to spend anything after that, right? So it's not like a garage where you have to like maintain it and other stuff. It's just a asphalt. So like LCC, for instance, doesn't charge for parking. So we actually might be able to get away with not charging ever if we're just big enough to not have to bother anyone. So I'm hoping, because even faculty, even professors have to pay for parking at Manila, like $900 a year.
Oh.
My wife got a ticket there yesterday, and it's $50.
50, 40.
Yeah, so I don't think she paid it in the 15 days, and then I think it went up to 50. So I had to go to the campus this morning and like get her out of it, and it just like totally killed like 30 minutes of my day. But I got her out of it. I got her out of it. So the golden rule. All right. What would Christianity tell us? Christianity would tell us, isn't the golden rule like do unto others as you would do? Do unto others as you would do unto yourself, right? In this case, the golden rule for economists is basically saying, what if there is a K-star that is the best K-star, right? So here's the question, or here's the issue. look at all these options, right? And I even used the word menu of choices, right? All of these are different steady states that you could potentially be at for all the different savings rates, right? If the savings rate is really low, then my steady state's going to be way over here, right? If my savings rate is really, really high, then my steady state will be over here. So just imagine me drawing a finitely large number of savings rates, right? Is there one savings rate that is the best, is the question. What would be the best? The best steady state would be the one that maximizes my consumption. Yeah, it sounds hedonistic to say that, but there's not really a better way to describe what makes people happy. So let's just say, what if we wanted to find the steady state that maximizes consumption? What if we wanted to find the steady state that maximizes consumption? There's nothing more I'm going to say about this slide. I'll let you copy if you want to, but there's nothing more I have to say about it. I just want to find the maximized amount of consumption, the optimal amount of consumption as it relates to the maximized amount of output per worker. I want a gym. I really want a gym to be built on this campus.
There's one in the small, but it's too
I
small.
know, it's too small, but at least we have something now. I want a cafeteria, dorms are supposed to be coming at some point. Faculty housing, but there's no way in hell I would live on this side of the island.
Where do you build the dorms?
The dorms are going to be built over that side.
Wow.
There's no way I would live over here. You couldn't pay me enough.
Really want to live west side?
No, God, no. Oh my God, no. No way. No, no.
Wait, you're saying this says the third?
I'd rather live with Levi than.
We live on the west side.
Yeah, I know, that's what I'm saying. I gotta do it, yeah, go on.
So
Yeah,
if you increase S,
And your bully sister.
C increases, but C also decreases at the same time.
Repeat that again?
Is that what it's saying? Like, so it says an increase of S means that C star increases, but C star
Decreases.
also decreases?
No, because you can't just say, so we got the balancings, because if I get a higher amount of savings would lead to a higher steady state, right?
Yes, higher K.
But a higher savings rate leads to lower consumption, right? Because income can only go to savings or consumption. You see?
Yeah.
On the other side, what if I save a really low amount? Then my consumption is pretty high, but it's pretty high of a very low Y because I'm not saving enough money, right? My capital is pretty low. So do you see what I'm trying to balance here? That's what the increase in S in the sub-bullet points is kind of referring to.
Why does it say it raises C star?
Because the Y is getting bigger. So C star is bigger because the Y star is bigger, right? C star is bigger because if, let's say, consumption is 0.7, then it's 0.7 of a really big number, right? SF of K, or F of K, sorry, F of K. Right, let's say that a high savings rate leads to a high capital, right? Which means now that the economy is going to be very large. If the economy is very large, now it's 0.7 of this really, really large economy.
Also, it's just kind of like everything gets scaled bigger.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
I think they're playing a video game in that classroom across the way, which makes me wonder what they're doing.
Oh yeah, I see it.
Yeah.
Building.
What are they playing?
Oh, it looks like maybe they have like a VR headset and then they're just projecting.
What are
just the
classes doing around here?
projector.
No wonder, like, if I get that professor, like, best professor I ever had. Fantastic. And then you guys will be like, why does that guy keep talking about Leroy? He's so unprofessional. Why didn't you just leave? Okay. Okay. So here's what we're going to find now. So now we want to to create a new term called K-star gold, where K-star gold is the steady state level, the K-star level that maximizes consumption. So that's what we want to find. Okay, so if we want to do that, then let's try to find a steady state level of consumption. The steady state level of consumption would be my total income or total output minus investment. Investment is the same as our depreciation, right? Because the two are the same, right? Investment crossing out with depreciation. And Y star is the same as F of K. And at the steady state, right, the investment has to equal depreciation, right? Because the two are canceling each other out at the steady state. So I'll pause here. Creative media, then either education or business, then humanities, dorms. Yeah.
Where's the gym at?
Yeah, I don't know. They talk about building it, but then they also have to build all these stores. So apparently they're going to build all these like stores and stuff.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so we have like 240 acres to fill up this junk.
Stores like
A lot.
like food stores or
Food stores, shops, you know, like it's basically become a, they call it a residential village.
sounds pretty cool actually.
Yeah, but it'll happen like 20, 30 years from now. It's not gonna-
Is that why there's so much online classes now because they can't fulfill like
No, there's a lot of online classes because professors get to choose and then they get really lazy. Like
Yeah.
this class would be so easy
That's,
if
that's the reason why.
yeah, professors get to choose. There's no
Is so easy.
Yeah.
I thought all this time was because like they can't like sustain how much.
no professors get a choice. And so the laziest professors are the ones that choose to the laziest professors are the ones that choose to oh, it's still recording. Wait, pause here. Okay.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, exactly. So
I can't do more than one.
it's descriptive of the reality is that you're not getting your money's worth to take on. And that is
It's
honestly
like more
true.
time consuming too and stuff.
When you have to, if the
Self-study.
professor made their own lectures, which is what I do at least, then it's not so bad because the person put in time. But
She's not doing anything.
exactly, most of the time they don't actually make a lecture. They just use
They
the
just
thing
do that. They read
thing
the
that
textbook, and
yeah.
then you do a discussion post,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then-
exactly.
and then they
And
have
just-
like a midterm exam.
I stopped doing discussion posts because it's like, who cares? No one, right? I mean, we talked about it, right?
Yeah.
No one cares about what, you know,
You did a
Kristen
good
thinks
job.
about. What does Kristen think about that? Because no one gives a damn, right? Like, let her figure it out for herself. Like,
Oh, you
and
have
then
to comment
one
on
person
everyone's
posts and the other was like, great idea. I never thought of it that way.
Right?
He's only
I mean,
posting that because he was forced to. You're only posting that because you were
Yeah,
forced
it's
to.
so bad.
And like,
I know.
there's enough Christians in the world that like posted the day it came out, and then there's enough, right, of caches that only post on the last day because they totally forgot to, right? Yeah.
No, but like, literally, I'm sitting there and I'm like, I think you did a good job on how you phrased this because he has like a word like
Yeah,
word
exactly. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And you totally know that the professor isn't even looking at it. That's why, like, for a week or two, I did discussions. I looked at how many people were participating and the quality. I was like, man, this is bad stuff. And I just said, fine, we'll just split the points across everything else and let's just stop this charade. Yeah. Okay. So that would mean then, graphically speaking, that the golden rule amount to maximize consumption, we're basically trying to maximize this difference, right? Because this isn't the same as my total output. This is the same as my savings, right? So total output minus savings is consumption. So I just need to maximize now that area.
I was just trying to understand.
Yep. You need to maximize this area. And what we can see with this is that there is a steady state that maximizes consumption. That there is a appropriate steady state level, which means I now need to pass government policies that make the steady state here and that make the savings rate the same as my depreciation rate. Now keep in mind, keep this in mind here. This is important. If you're looking at the graph very quickly, this is a different graph than what I've been showing you. Because this is not SF of K. This is F of K. Yeah, this is F of K, not SF of K. So this is not a steady state. I know you're kind of used to looking at this and think, oh, that's a steady state. But this is different. Let's just review here very quickly. Just so you see this here. SF of K and K, these are steady states. Savings rate and depreciation. This is saying all of these possible different K stars, this is the best K star. So all of these are possible steady states. That's why now, look at the x-axis, it's now different. It used to be capital per worker, now it's steady state capital per worker. That's an important difference. It used to be, just going back here, it used to be capital per worker, right? Little k. Now it's steady state capital per worker.
This is assuming that
K stars.
Saving is
The same as depreciation, right? Because at the steady state, savings is the same as depreciation. So there is no SF of K. S is basically contained in depreciation because at the steady state, savings is equal to depreciation. At the steady state, savings is equal to depreciation. I mean, that's the most important thing to remember about this. At the steady state, savings is equal to depreciation. See, my goal, why am I recording this class with the OWL, is that if I ever had to teach this class like in the summer online, which you have to teach a class online in the summer, like there's not really a choice, I would use this because then at least people will get a lecture, right? And then they'll be like, who's that cash kid? Man, you're dumb, right? Yeah, I'd say you're dumb now because it's Leroy, right? I mean, they'd be able to say, and this is Leroy.
You're gonna think that we're actually in class.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, exactly, yeah. I guess I could turn on light now at this point with all these things. Agatha, Christine. Okay, I'll pause for a moment here while you're still finishing this. What time is it?
6:11.
Okay. So we'll get through about 2/3 of the slides here, and then we'll just have to finish it up next week. Don't forget for your other classes, you don't have class, not this coming Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that. Which means, Cash, you got it easy. You're in good class next week.
We don't have class next week?
Not next week. The Tuesday, the election day, we don't have classes.
Oh, sweet.
I mean, next 2 Tuesdays from now. Not next Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that. First, no, the one before that.
6.
Yeah, we don't have class. There's no school. School's closed. School's closed.
Oh, it's my manager's birthday.
Really? You're a good worker. You're a good worker. You're gonna, that is a good worker. That's why you're a training person, though, right?
Yeah, but I also got maybe OSP.
What is that?
This is like on-site person that
It's
like.
pretty much HR and restaurant level accountant.
Wow,
That's what
you
you
are
do.
moving up in the factory world.
But like I'm only gonna do like one street.
Shit, that's good.
Do you get more pay?
She's the backup.
But it's good
It's
experience.
good for experience.
Yeah, it's good for experience. Yeah, you're moving up in the factory.
I want that steak medallions.
Yeah. Are they going to expand more on the islands? You could open up your own. That wouldn't be a bad gig.
No.
You don't think they will? Or you think it would be a bad job?
True.
Okay. It would be a bad job? Okay.
Be a bad job.
No.
No.
I'll send you my students.
There's you get no holidays. You get.
That's true. You actually have to work more on the holidays, right?
Yeah, you gotta work on all holidays.
That's why you get underlings to do it. Ones that remember your birthday. I'll wait for you. Yeah, it gets dark early.
Sorry, I'm slow.
No, no worries.
I'm trying,
No worries,
I'm trying to grasp.
No, you're just pissing off legions of future online students. They're
Oh,
not
yes, it's gonna
wait
get
for
a
you to do this.
Yeah, screw you guys.
If you like fast forward the video.
Yeah, you say that to the camera. Screw
I'm
you
learning right now.
guys.
Screw you guys. I'm learning.
Remember, they're from the future, though, right? So you're gonna say like from the future. Yeah. Okay. So, that would mean that the amount that the slope of this, remember, is the MPK. Remember, the slope of this function is marginal productivity of capital. And it would be, you can see here, the way to maximize C star is where the MPK is equal to the depreciation rate. So that's how you actually find where C star is maximized. C star is maximized where the slope of the production function, the slope of the production function being MPK, is equal to the slope of the depreciation line, which is essentially depreciation.
Okay.
So that's how we actually, right on the previous slide, we were just eyeballing it, right? And we could see, oh yeah, that's where the gap is the biggest. But more formally speaking, it would be where the slope of my production function, MPK, is equal to depreciation. Yeah, which is why then psych is like all online, or why
Because all the professors.
finance is primarily online.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's why every time I offer a cross-listed course, everyone takes it from finance. And the class fills, which is
What are you
great.
talking about in the summer? You're gonna offer?
I'm going to offer International Trade and Finance, which is a finance course.
And I can use that for the econ.
Oh, yeah. And you could use it for finance, honestly. So use it for whichever one you need the electives for. Because you could take it as finance, international trade and finance. I am teaching international trade and finance this coming summer. You could take the econ version, which is fine. But honestly, just take it as the finance version, because then when you're getting closer to graduation, you can either say, should I just have a count for the econ major, or you could say, oh, I'm short on finance electives, I'm going to have a count as my finance.
So just count it as finance.
Yeah, so just take it as finance, because we can always backwards do it.
So, that's gonna be in like 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. They're still playing volleyball? Oh yeah, they're still playing volleyball. In the dark. Good for them.
That one would be great for volleyball.
Yeah, no, it would be.
Like, that'd be fun.
Yeah, see, they need to get. I don't know, they can-
Levi's allergic to the grass.
Really?
He'll have fun.
Yeah. My son, it's funny, they did water play yesterday, which is what you do in your preschool, you play. And it's funny, he didn't want to sit on the grass, so he took his beach towel and put it on the cement. And then all the kids are like sitting in the grass, and he's got his beach towel sitting on the cement. I don't know if this is smart in that picture. I just think it's dumb. Kids are kids, I guess. Okay. And this is the big thing then for why did Solow get the Nobel Prize? Not only for developing this model, but then saying there is no, so unlike a steady state, which is an equilibrium, a golden steady state is not an equilibrium. You're not going to magically go to that appropriate golden rule steady state unless you push the economy to that appropriate one, which is why China does one-child policy, which is why Ethiopia says, abstinence and safe pregnancy practices, which is why Japan imposes certain policies that encourage people to immigrate to the country, right? Or Canada does policies to encourage people to immigrate to the country. Although I don't think Trump would say it in this kind of argument, which now our future students would be like, who, that old-timey president from long ago? Right? You could make that argument if you say, I don't want people to come into this country, because you could say, we have too many people. But I don't think he'd say that. So that's why bullet number 2 is so important then, because then after you compute this all, you then need to tell policymakers to pass policies to get that appropriate golden rule amount. You need to now pass policies to get that appropriate savings amount. Which means, again, there is such a thing as saving too much and saving too little, which is why the whole point of Abenomics, which is this whole thing under Shinzo Abe of Japan, of saying that the Japanese are saving too much money, they need to be spending more money. Japan has been stuck in a recession for decades, and the only way we're going to get out of this is if we tell the Japanese, spend more money. So then you pass policies that make people spend more money. So what Shinzo Abe is saying is, dude, if you're a woman and you have a kid, you're going to get a year off, right? Because having kids is a totally fantastic way to increase consumption spending, right? Because all you're going to do is buy diapers and clothes, right? Although my kid is actually wearing all of Katie Landgraf's kids' clothes. So her son was born 3 months before mine. So when she's done with hers, the clothes and the kid grows out of them, they go right on mine. So it's just a process. So my kid looks like Katie Landgraf's kids. Yeah, I know. So I don't want to spend too much time on these slides because I don't want to be too inefficient here. These are just slides that are talking about the transition to the golden rule. This is basically the Japanese story. The Japanese story is one where you're telling people to save less and that they'll actually be able to spend more as we transition to a higher rate. Don't worry about this. I'm not as concerned about this, honestly. If this was a 2-semester class, I'd spend more time on it, but I don't want to. And the opposite side of this would be like the United States.
2-semester classes?
I wish. No, there are 2-semester classes. This class, unfortunately, is not one of them. I wish it was, though, because we could totally do a lot more.
The advanced theory of macro.
Exactly. Yeah, basically, we call it intermediate macro 1 and an intermediate macro 2. That would be so cool. So that's the steady state levels of capital. Now we have population. What time is it?
6:12.
What do I want to do here?
There's only one of the two.
Let me get through population, and then that'll take me.
Oh no, that's the one.
Let me just get through population, and then I'll stop for today. Okay, so now let's introduce the new growth rate. So we had the growth rate before being something like savings, which added to investment, depreciation, which took away from investment. So we've been talking about growth rates all day today. So let's add one more growth rate, and that would be N. N standing for the change in the population. As is typical here, we're missing a delta. Yeah, it's so dark outside. Yeah, so we're changing L. Yeah. So the change in L, as our population is growing over time, so this would be obviously if it's 1,000 and then it's growing at 2%, that would mean then that, right, I have 1,020 in year 2. That growth rate here would be 2%, right? So I would have to have some notion of how fast the population is growing. Growth rate N. So this would be what Chinese policymakers were doing in the early 70s. Right, they were saying, dude, we got 1 billion people and they're all replicating like crazy. Right, the N is really, really big if we leave this unchecked. Same with what Ethiopia would have been doing 2 decades ago, right? If we just let people do what they do, they will certainly replicate crazy, like crazy. So there's not many else. I mean, I know this says a lot, but you know, I'm really just saying N is the growth rate of population. Well, what's important for that then is the way in which that contributes to my capital per worker. Because now I have 2 things that are killing my capital per worker. First, the fact that the capital is wearing out, which means that the big K is getting smaller. Or, right, I mean, just to, I don't know if this is a bad marker. But you guys can see it. They're just the future kids can't see it. Everyone agree with this? Yes? Right? Depreciation causes K to fall. So obviously depreciation makes little k get smaller. But also, N causes L to go up, which would also cause little k to get smaller. Right? Now I got to control for 2 things. I have to save enough to replace worn out capital, depreciation, but now I also need to save enough to reflect the fact that I have more people. Which means if I don't think I can save enough, then I have to stop people from replicating. Impose a one-child rule, right? I mean, that's a very drastic thing that you could only pull off in China. But, I mean...
and both decrease little k.
Yeah. Exactly. Yep. Which then means I don't need, right? I mean, basically I have my amount that I'm adding to the capital stock, and then I'm subtracting something from my capital stock, the difference between the 2 being my delta. I mean, it's got to be hard to impose a child rule because it's binary. You can't say you can have 1.5 kids. I mean, you know, so it's either like, do you want 1 or 2? And it wasn't that long ago. I want to say it was 5 years ago, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago that China relaxed the one-child rule. So it's certainly not in the, you know, just a few years ago. Or for you future online students, it was really long ago. Did they stop?
Yeah.
It's too dark. I like once-a-week classes. It makes it easier for me. I don't know. It's just easier because we can do a whole chapter most of the time in a whole.
Yeah, instead of your principles, you do like half a chapter.
Yeah, you do half a chapter, and then you have to, you know, fix the other, do the other part the other time. And then you do quizzes, and in-person exams, and yeah, principles. You just don't get any of the fun. It's just getting it done. Okay. So now, let's alter this a little bit. So, steady state used to be here with just delta k, right, depreciation k. But now we just add another term to it, delta plus n. which would be our population growth rate. So now, same thing here. Here's our now steady state. Here's our now steady state. Our steady state is now K star, just a new term of n added to it. Which would mean if population increases, means the country's growing too fast, it reduces our steady state. This is what China was trying to avoid, right? Is that right? Nothing to do on a night, right? And you keep making kids, right? Or I guess join the army, right? And you keep having kids, right? It reduces the steady state. Which means you want to tell people these are only the number of kids you can have. If you don't like it, actually you could move to rural China. And in rural China, I think you got to have up to 5 kids, but that's because you needed them for the farm and stuff. And it's not like you want to live in rural China.
Is depreciation constant?
Yeah, we're assuming that it's constant. It just makes life easier. Obviously, in reality, it's not. Which is exactly, Chinese followed the solo growth model. And it was to their benefit that they did. Because if they hadn't, they would have had lower capital per worker and they would have had lower income forever. Well, for a long time. And so they actively, now the other side of it would be the Japanese are not replicating fast enough right now. Right, so the population growth rate can be too small. And for the mainland, for instance, if you exclude Hispanics, Hispanics and Asians are replicating fast enough, but white people are not. So the US is not going to grow population-wise if we don't allow immigration or if we don't encourage people to have more kids by like family leave and other kinds of policies, right? I mean, that's what Abenomics is doing, right? In Japan, Shinzo Abe passes the law that says women, you get a year off, men, you get some time off. And that means they're like, okay, dude, let's go to town, let's have a kid, and I know I'll be protected long enough to, I mean, think about things like, why do you need a year? Like, think about it, you have to do diapers, you have to breastfeed, you have to do all the things, right, that a newborn takes. And that's a lot of, and if you have to go right back to work, how are you going to do that? And, have a kid. So then you might say, okay, I'm just not going to have a kid, right? I'll just look at kids on TV. And then, right, and then the economy suffers. Okay. So, what this means then is if we want to look at the golden rule now with the population growth rate, is that now it's where MPK minus depreciation is equal to n, which is the same thing as saying it's where the slope of my production function, MPK, was equal to depreciation plus n. But if I want to know what the n is, meaning how did China know the one-child policy? Because they knew they wanted the population rate to increase by this. And it probably wasn't exactly 1, but it was either 0.9 or 1.1 or right, some number around 1. There's some number around 1. So this is the golden rule with a population growth rate, is MPK minus depreciation equals to n. Marginal productivity of capital minus depreciation equal to n. And why don't we stop it right there? I need to do not only the conclusions, but I also need to do technology. Why don't I just do those last few slides? So basically, we're going to do one more term, G, which is technology, and we'll just pick that up next week at this point. So we'll have to do about 10 slides to finish this lecture up, but it won't be that bad. And then it's actually a shorter chapter for next week too. So the big thing would be you've got an exam due next week. So again, I strongly, strongly encourage you that if you haven't looked at the
email it to you or turn it into Lalima?
turn it through Lalima. That's fine. But just make sure you look at that Fred website because that's probably the only one where if you don't want to teach yourself how to do it, that would be where you reach out to me at some point. So even if you're just like, I like to work on things at the last minute, at least look at that so that.
Can you see if I did it? Or like just see if like I'm on the right track about
Sure.
it? Yeah.
Hey, can you make it bigger? So,
Oh yeah.
yeah, there you go. Yeah.
And then this one. And then...
Yeah. Mhm.
Oh, it's good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna pause this. And we should be moving.
Good thing we did that one first.
Yeah, see, exactly. That's why you want to do that one first.